Everyone loves to joke that neighbors know more about you than your own family, but I never realized how true that was until the day my world collapsed. I'd lived on Brookside Lane for 5 years, a quiet cul-de-sac where everyone waved at each other, borrowed sugar, complained about the HOA. I thought it was perfect. Melissa loved it too, said it was the kind of street where you could grow old in peace. We had barbecues in summer, block parties on the 4th of July, kids riding bikes in circles until the streetlights came on. It felt safe. It felt like home. And maybe that's why I was blind to what was happening right across the street. At first, I blamed myself for not noticing the small things. Melissa always lingered a lit. The first crack came at a block party last spring. I was grilling burgers, sweating over the coals, when I turned and caught Melissa laughing at something Mark said. Not normal laughter, not the polite kind you give a neighbor. It was the tilted head, hair tucked behind ear kind of laugh she used to give me when we first dated. My chest tightened, but I shook it off. People laugh, I told myself. Don't be paranoid. But the signs piled up. She started walking the dog longer than usual, sometimes an hour, sometimes 2. I'd text her and she'd reply, just chatting with neighbors. When I asked which neighbors, she'd shrug, smile and say, oh, you know, whoever's outside. The smell of cologne on her shirt one night nearly broke me, but when I confronted her she snapped, it must have been from hugging Karen's husband goodbye. Stop being ridiculous. I swallowed my doubts. Because who suspects the man across the street? Then one evening, coming home late from work, I saw it. Melissa's car wasn't in the driveway. Lights were on in Mark's house, curtains half drawn. And through the gap, just for a split second, I saw her silhouette moving across his living room. She wasn't cleaning, wasn't just stopping by. The way she walked, hair loose, sweater slipping from her shoulder, made my stomach twist. I parked down the block and waited, engine off, watching until she finally left at 11:30, adjusting her clothes as she stepped out his door. I wanted to explode right there, but something stopped me. The way the porch light flicked on across the street, the way 2 neighbors glanced out their windows as if they'd seen it all before. That's when the truth hit me harder than her betrayal itself. I wasn't just being cheated on. I was the only idiot on the street who didn't already know. The next morning I stood at the end of the driveway with my coffee, staring at the gray house with red shutters like it had grown fangs overnight. Mark was out front pretending to check his mailbox, casual as hell in sweatpants and slippers, like he hadn't just fucked my wife a few hours earlier. Melissa was still inside our house, humming while she made breakfast, acting like the perfect spouse. My skin crawled. I wanted to march across the street and tear him apart right there on the curb, but then I noticed something that froze me. Mrs. Henderson, the 70-year-old widow 2 doors down, was watering her flowers. She glanced from me to Mark, then quickly looked away, her lips pressed tight. And on the porch next door, Karen, the same Karen my wife claimed to be hugging her husband goodbye, stood with a mug in her hand watching me, pity written all over her face. That was the moment I knew, they'd all seen it. Maybe not the sex itself, but the sneaking, the late nights, the smiles. Everyone on this street knew my wife was screwing the man across the road. Everyone except me. The shame hit harder than the betrayal. Every barbecue, every wave from a neighbor, every polite nod, it was all poisoned. Were they laughing behind my back? Joking about the dumb husband who couldn't see his wife slipping across the street after dark? My fists clenched until my knuckles cracked. I needed proof. Not just for me but for when I confronted her and she tried to spin it. Melissa was good at that, turning everything into my fault, making me feel crazy. I wasn't going to give her the chance. So I started watching. That night, when she said she was running to Karen's for a glass of wine, I set up my phone in the upstairs window facing Mark's house. Zoomed in, hit record. My chest pounded as I sat in the dark, waiting. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, she slipped out the door in her cardigan, glancing up and down the street before jogging across like a teenager sneaking out. The camera caught everything. Her knocking lightly, him opening the door with a grin, her slipping inside. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped the phone. I let it record for hours until the lights went dark. At 1:07 a.m. she came back, hair messy, shoes in her hand, creeping inside like I was already asleep. The video was damning, but I wanted more. I wanted the nail in the coffin. So I started asking quiet questions. Casual ones. I stopped Mrs. Henderson on her way back from church, asked how she was holding up. She patted my arm, smiled sadly and said, "You're a good man, dear. Stronger than most. Don't let the gossip get to you." Gossip. The word hit like a slap. Later that week, I caught Karen by the mailboxes and asked if she and Melissa had hung out recently. She froze, eyes wide for a split second before plastering on a smile. "Oh, not really, she's been busy," she said quickly, then turned away before I could press. Her tone said it all. She knew. They all knew. By the time I got home, the rage had hardened into something colder. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let her hang herself with the truth, and when I dropped it on her, there'd be no escape, not in front of me, not in front of the neighbors, not in front of anyone. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. The plan started small, almost petty, but the more I turned it over in my head, the more it grew into something sharper, something final. If Melissa wanted to crawl across the street like nobody noticed, then I'd make sure everybody noticed. No more whispers, no more pity looks from porches. I'd force the truth out into the open, burn every lie she thought she could hide behind. I waited. For 3 nights I pretended to be asleep, phone recording from the upstairs window, capturing her slipping into Mark's house like clockwork. I had hours of footage now. Melissa in her cardigan, Melissa in a dress, Melissa leaving at nearly 2 in the morning, her hair tangled and face flushed. Each clip was a bullet, and I loaded them all into a folder labeled with the date. On the 4th night I made my move. Melissa told me she was going to movie night at Karen's. I kissed her goodbye, smiled like the clueless husband, then waited 10 minutes before stepping out the front door. My phone was already in my hand, video rolling. Across the street, Mark's door opened right on cue, and there she was, my wife, slipping inside with a grin that wasn't meant for me. My stomach flipped, but my grip tightened. I crossed the lawn slowly, deliberately, each step echoing with the thud of my heart. Neighbors noticed. They always noticed. Curtains twitched, blinds shifted, the glow of phones behind glass. Perfect. That was exactly what I wanted. I walked straight up to Mark's porch, banged on the door so hard the frame rattled. Voices inside went silent, then hurried whispers, then footsteps. When the door cracked open, it was Melissa who answered, her face draining of color the second she saw me. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, blocking the gap with her body. I raised my phone higher, camera catching her in the doorway, catching the shadows moving behind her. "Just making sure everyone gets a good view," I said loud enough for the neighbors across the street to hear. "Smile, honey. The whole block already knows, you may as well give them the confirmation." Behind her, Mark stepped into view, shirt half-buttoned, hair a mess. His eyes flicked to mine, smug for a second, then wary when he saw the phone. "You should leave," he said calmly, like he was the homeowner and I was the trespasser. I laughed, sharp and broken. "Oh, I'm leaving. But not before every neighbor on this street gets the truth shoved in their faces. Not before your little late-night meetings stop being whispers and start being facts." I swung the phone toward the windows across the road. Faces ducked, blinds snapped shut. "Good. Let them squirm." Melissa tried to grab my arm, panic in her eyes. "Please don't," she started, but I yanked away. "Don't what? Don't show them what you've been doing in plain sight? Don't ruin the little charade you thought you could keep going?" "Too late, Melissa. It's already ruined." The camera caught her tears, caught Mark's glare, caught everything. My chest heaved, fury and vindication boiling together. And in that moment, I knew this was just the beginning. Because I wasn't going to stop at the neighbors. I was going to expose her to everyone. The fallout started before I even got back inside my house. My phone buzzed nonstop. First Karen, then 2 other neighbors, all with the same tone. "We need to talk, please don't do this publicly, think of the neighborhood." That told me everything I needed to know. They hadn't just suspected. They knew. They'd been complicit, covering for her, covering for him, keeping the peace on our quiet little street while I walked around like the village idiot. That burned worse than the affair itself. Melissa stormed in 20 minutes later, eyes red, hair a mess, voice shaking with fury. "What the hell was that?" she snapped, slamming the door. I laughed in her face, the sound raw, ugly. "That was me finally joining the rest of the neighborhood. You know, the one that's been watching you crawl across the street like a slut for months." Her slap came fast, stinging across my cheek, but I didn't flinch. I just smiled, slow, cruel. There it is. The real Melissa. She broke down then, tears streaming, hands clutching her head. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she sobbed. "It just happened. He was there when you weren't. He understood me. I didn't think anyone would." I cut her off with a shout so loud it rattled the windows. "Didn't think anyone would notice?" "They all noticed, Melissa. Every single person on this street saw you sneaking around like a teenager, and I was the last to find out. Do you know how humiliating that is?" Her face twisted, rage flaring through the tears. "So what? You want to destroy me? You want to ruin my life in front of my family, my friends? You think that makes you any better?" I leaned close, my voice low, deadly calm. "No, Melissa. I don't want to ruin your life. I want you to watch while you ruin it yourself." The next day I sent the videos to her mother, her sister, her boss. No explanation, no long message, just the clips of her slipping into Mark's house, the timestamps clear in the corner. By lunch my phone was blowing up again. Her sister screaming in texts, her boss demanding a meeting, her mother begging me not to air dirty laundry. Too late. The laundry was already on the line and every stain was hers. Melissa came home that night pale and shaking, eyes darting like a hunted animal. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "Why would you drag everyone into it?" I set my phone on the table, hit play on the longest clip. Her face, her laugh, her body slipping into Mark's house under the porch light. The sound of my own voice whispering time and date into the mic. I let it play until she dropped to her knees, sobbing into her hands. I crouched down, lifted her chin so she had to meet my eyes. "You dragged them into it the second you spread your legs across the street. I'm just making sure no one forgets who lit the match." And the way she looked at me then, like I was a stranger, like I was the monster, made me realize she still hadn't understood. I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. The HOA met once a month in Karen's garage, a little neighborhood ritual where people bickered about fences, lawn ornaments, and whose trash bins were left out too long. Normally I avoided it. Melissa went in my place, playing the friendly wife while I stayed home. But this time I made sure to be the first one there. I set up a folding chair dead center, my phone in my pocket loaded with every clip, every photo, every timestamp. Tonight wasn't about trash bins. Tonight was about setting the street on fire. Neighbors trickled in, cheerful voices dying as they saw me sitting there stiff as stone. Melissa came last, late, face pale, eyes wide when she realized I was waiting. She opened her mouth, maybe to beg, maybe to warn, but I just shook my head. "Sit down." She did, hands trembling in her lap. Mark wasn't there, coward must have known. But his absence made it better. Let them speak for him when they saw the truth. Karen started the meeting, droning about parking violations, but no one was really listening. Everyone kept sneaking glances at me, waiting. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Finally, when Karen asked if there was any new business, I stood. My voice cut through the garage, steady, cold. "Yeah, there's business. All of you know what's been happening on this street. All of you watched it. And none of you had the decency to tell me." Murmurs rippled. Mrs. Henderson's eyes dropped to the floor. One of the younger dads shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Melissa whispered, "Please don't," but I ignored her. I pulled my phone out, hit play, and held it high for everyone to see. The video rolled. Melissa slipping out of our house, jogging across the street, Mark opening the door with that smug grin, her sliding inside. Gasps filled the garage. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Another whispered, "I told you." I let the second clip play, then the third, Melissa leaving disheveled at nearly 2 in the morning. By the time the fourth video started, Melissa was on her feet, screaming, "Turn it off. Please, for God's sake, stop." Tears streamed down her face, her voice ragged, but I didn't stop. Not until every neighbor had seen what I'd seen. When I finally lowered the phone, silence reigned. Karen looked sick, pale as chalk. Mrs. Henderson crossed herself. A man in the back shook his head, muttering, We all knew, but damn." Melissa collapsed into her chair, face buried in her hands, sobbing loud enough to echo off the garage walls. I looked around the circle, at every face that had smiled at me while knowing I was being played. "Next time you want to protect the neighborhood's peace," I said, voice dripping venom, "remember this. Peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's rot." No one argued. No one defended her. For the first time, I wasn't the fool of Brookside Lane. And watching Melissa crumble under the weight of her own exposure, I realized I wasn't done yet. Because Mark still hadn't faced me. And I was going to drag him into the light too. I didn't wait long. The next night, porch lights glowed up and down Brookside Lane like little beacons of judgment. Word had spread faster than wildfire, neighbors whispering, curtains twitching, phones buzzing. Melissa locked herself in our bedroom, refusing to come out, but that was fine. My focus wasn't on her anymore. It was on the gray house with red shutters, the one that had mocked me every time I looked out my window. Mark hadn't shown his face since the HOA meeting. No mail check, no lawn work, no friendly waves. He was hiding, hoping the storm would blow past. But I wasn't going to let him. I walked across the street just after 10, phone in my pocket, adrenaline burning through me. Every step felt like the whole block was watching, though I didn't care anymore. Let them see. Let them record. I pounded on his door, loud enough to rattle the shutters. Silence. I hit again, harder. "Open the door, Mark," I shouted. Time to stop hiding. A curtain upstairs shifted, just a flicker, and my blood boiled. I hit the door one last time, then turned and walked to the side of the house. His truck was parked in the driveway, meaning he was home. The coward just thought he could outwait me. Fine. I wasn't leaving. I pulled a chair from his porch, set it square in front of his door, and sat. Minutes crawled. Neighbors peeked from their windows, their phones glowing. I didn't move. Finally, after what felt like hours, the door cracked open. Mark stood there, sweatpants, bare feet, hair sticking up like he'd been pacing all night. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw tight. "You need to go home," he said, low and cold. I stood slowly, close enough now to smell the cheap whiskey on his breath. "Go home." I laughed sharp. "That's rich, coming from the man who spent months sneaking into my home through my wife." He flinched just for a second, then steadied himself. "It's not what you think," he muttered. I shoved my phone in his face, hit play on the recording of Melissa slipping into his house at 1:07 a.m. "Explain this, then. Explain why the whole block knew except me." His face twisted, but not in shame, in irritation, like I was an inconvenience. "Look, it happened all right. She came to me. She wanted it. You were never there, always working late, always distracted. She needed someone, and I was right here." He leaned closer, his voice like poison. "Don't hate me for giving her what you couldn't." White-hot rage surged through me, my fists curling so tight my knuckles popped. Every muscle screamed to put him through the wall, to break his smug face so badly he'd never smirk again. But somewhere in the back of my skull, a colder voice whispered, "That's what he wants. That's the story he's ready to tell, that you're violent, unstable, dangerous. Don't give him the ending he wants." So I stepped back, forcing myself to breathe, forcing the fury to freeze into something sharper. "You're right," I said finally, voice trembling but steady. "You were here. You were convenient. And now you're going to be unforgettable." I raised my phone, aimed the camera square at him, and hit record. "Say it again, Mark. Say it for everyone watching. Tell the world how you fucked your neighbor's wife while waving to him across the street." His eyes widened, panic flashing. He shoved the door, trying to slam it shut, but I wedged my foot in, holding it open just long enough for the camera to catch his face, his fear, his guilt. Then I stepped back, letting the door slam. My voice carried down the street, loud enough for every neighbor to hear. "That's the man who betrayed this whole block. That's the man who ruined my marriage." Lights flicked on up and down the street. Curtains opened. Faces appeared. And for the first time, Mark wasn't just my problem. He was the neighborhood's disgrace. The next morning, Brookside Lane didn't look the same. The air was heavy, the silence unnatural. Normally by 8 you'd hear lawnmowers, kids shouting, Mrs. Henderson sweeping her porch. Not today. Today every curtain twitched when I stepped outside with my coffee. Eyes followed me, but not with pity anymore, with something sharper, like they were waiting to see what I'd do next. Across the street, Mark's truck still sat in the driveway, but he hadn't come out. Coward. By noon, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. Karen cornered me at the mailbox, arms folded, jaw tight. "You didn't have to do it like that," she said. I laughed in her face. "Didn't have to? You all knew. You smiled at me, waved to me, and let me be the fool. Don't lecture me about how I exposed the truth." She flinched but didn't argue. Instead she muttered, "Well, he won't be showing up at the block party again." Later I saw Mrs. Henderson crossing the street with her little poodle, but instead of her usual cheerful nod, she stopped in front of Mark's house. She stood there, arms trembling, then spit on his driveway before walking away. My jaw dropped. Sweet, church-going Mrs. Henderson had more guts than half the block. And she'd just drawn a line in the sand. By evening, the shift was undeniable. Cars slowed when they passed his house. A group of teenagers biked past yelling, "Homewrecker," at his shutters. One of the dads down the street, Jim, who'd always defended Mark as a good guy, marched up to his door and pounded hard enough to shake the siding. "Stay the fuck away from my wife," he shouted for the whole neighborhood to hear. Mark never opened the door. Curtains moved, but he stayed hidden. Melissa, meanwhile, was unraveling inside our house. She'd barely spoken to me since the HOA meeting, but now she paced like a trapped animal, whispering about how everyone was turning against her. She begged me to stop, to delete the videos, to tell people it was a misunderstanding. I stared at her, stone cold, and said, "The misunderstanding was me thinking you were faithful. The rest is crystal clear." Her sobs filled the hall, but I felt nothing. Just cold satisfaction. That night, I stood at the window and watched as a police cruiser rolled slowly down Brookside Lane, headlights sweeping over the gray house. No sirens, no knock on the door, just a slow crawl, like even the cops wanted him to know he was being watched. Neighbors peeked out, phones glowing, recording. And for the first time since I'd moved here, Brookside Lane wasn't protecting its helpful neighbor. They were circling him like vultures. And I knew it was only a matter of time before someone forced the door open. For answers, for vengeance, maybe both. By the end of the week, Brookside Lane felt like a courtroom and Mark's house was the defendant's chair. His once perfect lawn went unmowed, packages piled up on his porch, and every evening neighbors stood in little clusters whispering about him without even pretending to hide it. Kids rode past chanting, "Cheater house," until their parents dragged them home. He used to be the street's handyman, the good guy everyone leaned on. Now he was a ghost behind curtains, and the whole block treated him like rot they couldn't scrape off fast enough. The final nail came Saturday. The HOA president, Karen's husband of all people, called an emergency meeting. In broad daylight, half the street gathered in front of Mark's yard. I stood at the edge, arms crossed, Melissa beside me with her eyes on the ground. When Mark finally stepped out, unshaven and hollow-eyed, the murmurs turned to open jeers. Jim, the dad who'd confronted him earlier, spat at his feet. Mrs. Henderson told him to his face he was filth. And when he tried to speak, to mutter that it wasn't just him, Karen cut him off with a shout. "You betrayed all of us. You waved at us with his wife in your bed. You made this whole street complicit." The words hung in the air like a sentence. Mark's face crumpled, and for the first time he didn't look smug, he looked beaten. He turned back into his house without another word, and the door slammed so hard it rattled the windows. The crowd dispersed, but the verdict was clear. He wasn't welcome here anymore. That night, Melissa sat across from me at the kitchen table, her hands shaking around a mug of untouched tea. "They all hate me too," she whispered. "Even Mom won't answer my calls. I can't go to the store without people staring." Her eyes lifted to mine, full of panic. "What are we going to do?" I leaned back, staring at her like she was a stranger in my house. "What we are going to do? Nothing. You made this bed with him and now you get to lie in it. I'm done covering for you. I'm done pretending." She broke down then, sobs racking her body, begging for another chance, swearing it was just a mistake. I let her cry, but inside I felt nothing but the steady calm of someone who's already made their choice. Tomorrow I'd call a lawyer. Tomorrow I'd start tearing down what was left of our marriage. As I stood and walked upstairs, leaving her crumpled at the table, I glanced out the window one last time at the gray house with red shutters. Lights off. Curtains drawn. For the first time since moving to Brookside Lane, the block was quiet, almost peaceful. And I realized something I hadn't felt in months. The only ghosts haunting this street now were theirs.